I want to share with you just a couple of incidents that I think help show what's really happening across the state and across the country. As was mentioned in the introduction, prior to me assuming my role as Attorney General, I was a county prosecutor in Bergen County. And fairly quickly into that role, I began to see these types of incidents come across my desk. And I want to go back to one particular date in last year, January 9th of 2017. That morning, the Jewish Community Center in Tenafly, New Jersey, which has a school, which has a gym, which has offices, which has a daycare and child care facilities, that morning on January 9th, they received a phone call from someone who purported to be an elderly woman reporting that there was a bomb at the JCC that morning. And as you can imagine, when that type of call is received, it prompts a law enforcement response. Local law enforcement responded, our prosecutor's office responded, SWAT teams responded, and they cleared the JCC. They went throughout the whole facility. You know, kids were brought out of daycare to a safe location. There was no bomb. That same scene on January 9th of last year repeated itself at 16 other JCCs and Jewish daycare facilities around the country. They were evacuated similarly. That instilled such a sense of panic across the country, all across the eastern seaboard, and it continued because in the ensuing months going into February and early March, we had something like 80 JCCs, according to my numbers, in 33 states and 2 Canadian provinces that received over 100 bomb threats. Again, prompting the same type of response, with children being evacuated. But importantly, although that caller was captured by the FBI in conjunction with detectives from our prosecutor's office in Bergen County, they had their desired effect. I don't call these calls hoaxes, because they do actually have an effect. It made it difficult for parents to drop off children. It made it difficult for individuals to use those facilities. It made it difficult for faith communities to exercise their religion. And that's just one example with the JCCs, because what we saw in New Jersey around the same time were houses of worship being targeted by suspicious mailings. We saw churches, synagogues, mosques receiving suspicious packages throughout the first few months of last year. In one particularly disturbing incident, a series of mosques received mailings from someone purporting to be the Muslim Slayer, and with horrific pictures and comments directed at those mosques and the people who worship there. And that conduct escalated. While we didn't see it here in New Jersey, what we saw throughout 2017 was an escalation of this type of conduct, that this rise in intolerance and hate started to manifest itself in actual physical violence across the country. In February of last year in Olathe, Kansas, we saw 2 Indian engineers who were celebrating at a bar. An individual came in and questioned their loyalty and their patriotism because of the way they looked. And he shot at him. He killed one. And he also killed an innocent bystander who tried to intervene. We saw that scene unfold itself again in New York City, where we had an individual from Baltimore just about a month later, in March of 2017, travel up to New York City because he wanted to kill black people and he thought he would attract more attention if he did it in New York City. And he had killed a 66-year-old African-American man in New York City. We saw the incident in Portland, Oregon in May of 2017, where 2 young Muslim girls were on a light rail, and an individual came up to them and started insulting them and hurling insults. And 3 bystanders on that train intervened, and 2 of them were stabbed and killed. And we saw an escalation and a culmination of all of this in August of 2017 in the protests in Charlottesville and the killing of Heather Heyer and 19 other individuals who were injured. And fortunately, we haven't seen that type of violence in this state, but there's another disturbing trend, and I don't know if you've talked about it today, but I think it should be talked about because it's important. What I also saw at the local level, and what we continue to see, and which is not fully captured by any of the data that I shared with you, is an uptick in juvenile incidents of bias, where students and children now think it's okay to draw swastikas on the walls of their schools, or write bigoted comments on the walls of their schools, or harass their fellow students using Snapchat with bigoted comments. And in one instance in particular, a rather disturbing incident, we had students in one of our schools in Bergen County last year who thought it was okay to just assemble cinder blocks that they had seen as they were walking into the formation of a swastika and Snapchat it to fellow students in their school who happen to be Jewish. So there's almost a normalization of this type of conduct. And I think it was talked about on the previous panel that there don't seem to be the same consequences that there existed before. Maybe because students don't think about the permanence of this type of conduct when they're using social media to intimidate fellow students, or maybe it's just a general feeling in the society that this type of conduct can be tolerated, but it can't. And so let me just finish by telling you in a few short comments what we're doing about it, because that juvenile conduct can escalate. We had a case in Bergen County, Dalal and Graziano. We tried that case in 2016 and 2017. Two young students who met each other in high school and started on this path in high school and ended up in 2011 going into 2012 engaging in a series of synagogue attacks and firebombings. And they were ultimately prosecuted and tried in 2016 and 2017 and each got 37 years under the domestic terrorism statute. So here's what we are doing and what we should be doing. First of all, we all have to take accountability here and really accept the principle that an act of violence against any one of our communities is an act of violence and hate against all of our communities. And so when we see it in the public square, we need to take responsibility and hit back and call it out when we see it. The second thing that we're doing at the prosecutor's offices across the county and at the Attorney General's office is that we are improving the way people can report this conduct. We are issuing directives where we want to make people feel comfortable coming in, to make our immigrant communities feel comfortable reporting crime, not intimidated from coming into a police station because they fear immigration consequences. We are putting out hotlines. We have a hotline 1-800-277-BIAS or bias@njdcj.org that can be used to report. We have a $25,000 reward that we offer for information that leads to any conviction for a bias crime. We're training our officers to better recognize bias crimes. We're setting up specialized units in all of our county prosecutors' offices and at our Division of Criminal Justice, which Director Honig will talk about in a moment. And we're working on prevention. On the student piece, we're working with our Department of Education to have an anti-bias, an anti-bullying, an anti-hate crime curriculum for middle school and high school students. That's something we're actively working on. And we're working with, you heard from Jared Maples from Homeland Security and Preparedness earlier this morning. We're working to harden our schools and our soft targets across the state and to equip them with the video surveillance equipment and other equipment to deter such conduct. And importantly, that conduct that doesn't rise to the criminal level, we're using the tools of our Division of Civil Rights to actively use our law against discrimination to identify and enforce that statute. For example, if there's discrimination in housing, discrimination in employment, we investigate hundreds of claims and we bring actions, whether someone's being discriminated against because of their faith, when they're going to seek out housing, or because of their religion or the color of their skin. We're not tolerating any of that conduct.